Wow. Good evening, everyone. It is indeed a glorious evening, and that we can all be grateful to see another day. That we're alive, that hopefully all of us have food on our table. Yeah, and more importantly, hopefully with our loved ones. I'm a bit out of breath. I ran upstairs and came back down just to ensure that I was on time, because time is everything. And speaking of time, I'm actually watching an incredible documentary. The executive producer is Jay-Z. It's called Time. And of course, it's speaking about prison reform and just the whole system in America, and with Black Lives Matter is happening overseas, and essentially affecting our African brothers and sisters. They are the diaspora, they come from us, they are us. It's just been a very strange time. Nothing new, but I guess somewhat shedding more light on what people have been going on for centuries. And so speaking of such, today I'll be speaking to a phenomenal woman. For those who don't know who she is, her name is Lesego. I've known her for years. She has incredible skits, essentially, which is satire in her case, as a satirist, and she plays the role of Coconut Culls. And what a smart way of essentially delving into very real issues we have in our country. And of course, we are still divided. We are not 100% free. We all know that. And I think, with everything happening around the world, the one thing everyone can be honest with is the fact that we still have a lot of work to do, and more than anything, honesty. And so she was just an incredible person to have, and I'm so fortunate to have her on tonight, because we'll basically be speaking about the schooling system, and how it affected those, especially multiracial schools, and the systemic racism as well, and the history behind that. Because of course, last week, Durban's College allegedly were accused of being racist. But you would think that by now such wouldn't be happening, but the reality is that it is still happening. And I, for one, as someone who went to a multiracial school, know that too well, and could completely relate to a story like that one, and of many schools, because then you found a lot of people coming on board and sharing their stories. And that's what tonight is all about. Is that of course there's social, economic, political, and education, of course, is the crux of any society and building a society. So how convenient would it be to ensure that you break one's esteem using education? So yes, I'm shocked, I'm flabbergasted that even at my son's generation, such systems still exist. But we're going to unfold this. Please feel free on this live to interact with me. We want to hear from you if you guys have any questions, anything to share, experiences. This is what today is about. But we're unfolding serious issues, and I guess so many people have been hurt by a system that hasn't favored them, and one that essentially is not equal to this day. So I'm going to try to get Lesego with me. Oh, and she's on time. So excited to have her. And once again, what an incredible being. Let's get Lesego on. And if there's any music in the background or any disturbances, I am a mom to a toddler. But my husband's doing the best. Hello, Lesego!
Hello, Nadi!
You look absolutely incredible. I'm doing so well. Thank you so much. Let me just put the volume up, because I've got a loud toddler who's in the background.
Can't relate
At all.
Cannot relate.
I can see your face beats is a lot more focused than mine. Mine was we try to look decent. But thank you. It's great. What's that?
I'm saying I'm shooting this whole week and stuff, so
oh, fantastic.
basically I'm just have to always be ready. Booked and busy. What is a pandemic?
But I wanted to say once again, thank you so much for your time. It personally means the world to me for you being on this live. I think I couldn't think of any better person to speak about the issue we're speaking about today. Because you touch on such topics, but more importantly, you've walked that journey. You know it personally. So you're speaking essentially from experience.
And my work is because of that journey.
Absolutely.
I keep telling people, I'm just like, Coconut Cows is because of the schools that we went to, because of the like shitstorm. I don't know if kids are watching, my bad, but because of what I experienced at school is why I have a career. So in a way, it's like using trauma to turn it kind of into comedy, if you will, but more commentary on the things that are still happening in schools today, 14 years after I matriculated.
Can you imagine? That's insane. And I think what a great way of tackling very serious, dark issues as well, because people don't necessarily feel attacked, but they're willing to listen. And I think that's very smart. But for those who don't know who Coconut Cows is, who Lesego is, how did Coconut Cows come about? Yes, you've already touched on it a little bit, but who is Coconut Cows?
So Coconut Cows for me is like a tool or a weapon that I use to kind of address microaggressions, especially because I think people are very aware of the big racism, the macro racism, things like the K word, the N word, but they're not really aware of the small racism, the microaggressions that we went through at school, or from school until now. It happens in the workplace as well. But, you know, things like you speak really well, you know, things like you're not like the others. So I kind of collected all those comments through the years, but the main thing that was the big catalyst to starting was the Pretoria Girls High hair incident when they told the girls not to have their own afros. And that reminded me of when I was at school 10 years before that. So I was just like, okay, the fact that this is still happening at schools today, the fact that girls so much younger than me are still dealing with the same issues that we thought we had kind of fixed in our time at school was just a little bit annoying. But also the white girls that I went to school with they weren't participating in the conversations. No one was saying anything. And if they did say stuff, it was very much like, well, why don't you just go to your own schools? Why don't you just go back to schools in the township? Why don't you just, you know, why are you coming here if you want to complain all the time? So I was just like, I wonder if you guys know how ignorant you sound. I wonder if you know how apathetic you sound. Maybe if I just literally, because I used to be the girl who rants on Facebook and no one would listen. And people kept telling me, like, if you say it nicer, then maybe we'll listen. So I kind of was like, okay, maybe if I just say it back to them the way they say it. A lot of Coconut Cows' comedy is real life comments that I found on different Facebook pages. So just if I say it back to them, maybe then they'll hear how ridiculous they sound. The whole career and everything after that was more a result of the popularity, but it wasn't like a plan to be like, I want to get into the industry and do it this way. This was just my way of venting and having people that I went to school with start having the conversations for real so that we can actually see a difference when people go to schools after us.
Well, clearly you're doing it very well. And it was, I think, essentially your important voice that a lot of us didn't have and a lot of people could relate to. And we actually have to thank you for that, because I think so many people wanted to do exactly what you're doing, where they wanted a place where they could voice, you know, their hurts, their experiences, and you've kind of taken on that role, and not to put any pressure because you're human as well, but where you essentially are making us feel heard. And I think that's so important. You know, you touched on the topic that I wanted to speak on. My hair, the reason why I've had this hair for the longest time was also because of that. Going to a former Model C school, you were told that you couldn't have your hair natural. You had to write a letter if you wanted to braid your hair before, and they had to approve of that. Can you imagine?
And it had to be the kind of braids that you could hold in a pony as well. So they had to be like super thin, which is damaging to the hairline. Like,
yeah. So meaning you have to use chemicals, essentially having Caucasian hair. And once I left school, in fact, matric year, I cut off my hair and I said no more, because at the end of the day, I'm an African. And a lot of that also I have to attribute to a very strong mom, because my mom, she's the 1960 generation. You know that, well, she's born in 1960, but the 1976 generation. So she was not having it at all, and always ensured that, you know, all of us as kids had a good self-esteem. And I think that's really important. But, you know, I did a lot of my research And former Model C schools and private schools, which are obviously very similar, former Model C schools being semi-private. So in 1991, there was Model A, B, C, and D. So I'm not going to delve in too much because I'm using my brain and I'm a little dizzy because I have a toddler in the background. But essentially, former Model C schools were, like I said, created in 1991. And that was to prepare the white population for essentially freedom, because then there'd be other race groups entering into that system. So that system essentially was for semi-private schools. And what they wanted to ensure, sorry, my son is in the background crying.
Yeah.
So he's saying, sorry, for everyone watching, he's saying he doesn't know why he's crying.
Oh.
Maybe it's a topic, but yeah, so former Model C schools were created essentially for the white population, semi-private, but also they were then preparing for, like I said, other race groups to enter this model. And what shocked me most was the fact that they were preparing.
Yeah, that's why I'm also like, what are you getting ready for? What do you need to get ready for?
What are you getting ready for? What do you need to get ready for? And essentially, obviously, they speak about how segmented, as we all know, schools were, and the form of education. For example, how my husband always speaks about he had Bantu education and how much he didn't know. Because I always share with him, like, oh, biology, we learned, chromosomes. And he's like, what? And, and just seeing how much they didn't have and how much we learned, and just those dynamics and what it meant to then go into these former Model C schools, not, the sense of not feeling that you belong because no one really wanted you, no one knew how to react, because also something, just reading on a lot, you know what you've created. Remember, essentially, African people were put in the ghettos, which were, like they called them previously, native reserves. But essentially, they were called native reserves. And knowing very well that system and ensuring that there was extreme poverty, you had to buy your own food, you have very minimal resources in general. Of course, you know what you're creating because you're creating a chaos. And now saying from that chaos, we have to now bring that same group that we've created this frustration into the school system. And one thing about Black Lives Matter, where I'm seeing a better narrative, is that besides economically, where people want freedom, which is the most important thing, also the accountability is going to those who actually essentially created this whole system. Yeah. And saying, no, this is not our issue. The onus is on you.
I mean, so at some point I'm seeing a little bit of performative accountability. So I'm seeing a lot of schools, I think because of the DGC thing, get a bit of a fright and then start putting statements out to say, from here on out, girls, we're going to be inclusive. We're going to have transformation conversations. And because I've heard those conversations every single year and seen no change, I think I'm still in the point where I'm like, okay, I need you to do that first. And let me see the enacted change. Let me see the girls. Let me see more Black teachers, more Black students at private schools before you kind of pat yourselves on the back and say, okay, we did something. We said something. Because I just think it's not enough at the moment, because I've just heard this over and over again since I was at school.
And we're essentially tired, and you are right. I was saying in terms of us as Abantu Bamyama, where we're saying that, no, this is not our sickness. Racism is not our sickness. It's yours, and you guys need to sort yourselves out, because this system wasn't ours, and for you guys to own it, instead of us having to do all the marching and rallying up and whatever, this needs to be a conversation you have at home, because this is honestly, your issue. And I think that is very important. What is a way forward? Because you can see, like you're saying, with those corporates or schools doing this whole PR and Black Lives Matter. No, we're not racist. We'll do anything, and essentially being reactive. What's a way forward? And also to, of course, later on we'll delve into the stories the things you went through essentially at school.
Well, for me personally, so my school has kind of come to a situation where they're like, we'll sit down with the students, we'll talk, whatever it is. And I think it shouldn't be the teachers and the principals, because a lot of the stories that I heard when I asked the question, what was your first instance of racism, had to do with teachers on students or principals on students. So, or even if it was students on students, but then principals and teachers not doing anything about it. So for me, it would be, I mean, I spoke to a company, I'll put the name on my Instagram because I actually forgot now, but they go around to different schools and they have the conversations with teachers and pupils separately so that they can actually understand what the issues are and then tackle the solutions, because nobody is going to be able to be honest when you're at school to say to the principals and the teachers, Mrs. So-and-so is racist. In history, this and this happened, when those are the people who are the gatekeepers of your school. So for me, it's definitely an external body that needs to, you know, be created and go around to these schools and have the conversation separately from the teachers. But also, I think as people of color or Black women, Black guys, when we leave the high schools, just to like leave them high and dry, I don't think is enough. You know, alumni networks are set up a lot for people to be able to go to careers. I mean, me going to an interview and saying I go to St. Anne's, people are like, oh, but we need to have a kind of support system of Black alumni so that the kids who are still there have a place where they can go, because we don't have Black teachers. We have like one Black teacher at school, and there's very little that they can do because they're also mistreated. So for me, it's the kids who leave and who become, you know, leaders in the world, in the country, to be able to look back and help the kids be able to have a place to speak and just have a little alumni, people of color network that at least provides emotional support, but also because of the power we now have and the places we hold in the world and the spaces we hold, to be able to hold the schools accountable without girls getting in trouble, without people getting in trouble, because the punishment is the reason why people are so afraid of speaking out, and they need our help. Parents also don't really understand all the time because they don't have the same experiences as us at all.
No,
you know, usually it'll be the first kid to go to these types of schools. So yeah, I think a strong Black alumni network that just, and it doesn't even have to be per school. I mean, it's easier that way. But if there was like an alumni network of Black graduates from former Model C schools and private schools, just like how they share it on Instagram and Twitter, where they can share their stories and things can actually be done, because we've got, you know, former scholars who are lawyers now, former scholars who are in politics, former scholars who are beautiful award-winning singers, you know, comedians, whatever it is. So, and we just need to have our children's back, I think, more.
What you said is so profound, and I wanted to delve in those stories, because I'll tell you mine. For example, I've always gone to multiracial school. The first one wasn't as bad, and I'll tell you why. Because it was so I'm born in 1988. Somewhere along the line, I started going to school. Yeah. And they were one of the very few private schools that allowed people of color. So already they were willing to have people of color. This is before 1994. And so essentially, and it was beautiful. We had people from all over the continent as well as the world. And then of course, locally. And so racism wasn't as bad as when I then moved to Durban North. When we moved to Durban North, I went to semi-private school. And obviously being naive, because my experience in like preschool, you know, was somewhat enjoyable, you know, completely different. And then there was this animal. For the first time ever, I saw someone who was supposed to be my friend, a white girl, call her dog the K word in front of me. And she, sorry. And I didn't know what that word was. I had no idea what it meant, you know. And so I asked my mom, Steve Biko, same WhatsApp group, was like, Mom, I don't know, my friend, and I was in grade 5 then. And I was like, my friend said this word, it's called the K word. My mom was like, huh? What? And naively, I was like, yeah, no, she called me the K word. Well, not me, the K word, her dog, the K word. What does it mean? And gave me a complete history of what it means. Obviously, its origins, which have nothing to do with Abantu Bamnyama, which also just always how twisted and futile racism is. But then understanding what it means as a Black person being called that word. You know, having to go to school the next day was so traumatic. Sorry, I can't believe I'm getting emotional saying it now, but it was so traumatic for a young Black kid. excuse me, who was just trying to blend in, being friendly, and thinking, wow, so you really think of my people and essentially me as that word. And that was the first time that it really like sunk in that, oh, we're truly divided. Another story I didn't know, I don't know, anyway, there's an artist called Beast. For those who know Beast, he has the song, Hello. So we went to the same primary school. And I don't know if I've almost blocked, because you know when you've been traumatized, and we all have, by the way, you kind of block your past somewhat. And he reminded me, this was like a month ago, that we were apparently divided in race groups during lunch, during break. And because obviously black people being the majority, we would be allowed to be in the field. But I think because the field is a lot more fun, you know, when you're a kid, you don't care about being in the sun and playing. I had no idea that happened, and that our principal at that school was then fired because of that, because obviously your parents had complained. But I had no idea we were actually segmented into different racial groups. So that school essentially made me realize what it meant to be a Black South African. And I before that, I honestly didn't, I knew I was different, but it didn't mean anything. And just from then onwards, all I would try to do is then fit in, because then it was like survival mode. And fitting in means, okay, so you guys are clearly being told or are told superior, you guys have hair like this, you look like this, you talk like this, so let me just survive, you know.
Yeah.
You have to go through this, and you're not necessarily always telling your parents about every event, but you knew that, okay, fine, I mustn't speak Zulu, because Zulu was a big thing. I remember a lot of the teachers would say, we don't know if you're swearing or not. Now, this is in an African continent. Remember, the vernac thing was like, you can't be speaking your language, because what if you're saying something naughty? So already you're like, okay, not speaking my language. And then you're like, okay, so my hair is also a problem. Didn't know that. So I'm going to relax my hair, have a high pony, and then I'm going to speak like this. And I know even like our features. I don't know if you know the song, my name is Tipo, I live in a kaya. I like to eat putu around the fire. My hair is, no, my teeth is like mealy. My hair is like wire. You don't know that song? Well,
No.
they used to sing that song to us, the primary school kids, the white kids, to us. And of course, not all of them, but a lot of them did. And we, you know, and then you sing along and you're like, ah, that's so funny, not realizing what's happening. But this is the scariest part of all of this, is these are kids. I'm talking about 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, people who shouldn't even be thinking that way at all, which meant, because essentially they're innocent, which meant that at home they were being fed all of the stuff, and this indoctrination at such a young age, because we weren't equipped. Our parents were thinking, well, you're free now, you know, democracy, so clearly everything's going to be hunky-dory. So you weren't equipped. So when a kid said something like that and insult you in a certain way, be racist, you weren't equipped, so you would just laugh and feel terrible about it, but you didn't know what to do. So I just remember that vividly, and it destroyed me from then onwards, you know, and you know how it continued until right now, which is topic 6 in the evening.
I think for me, my first instant of knowing that there was racism at my school was with our names. So it was very, very, very micro. But I just remember when I first got there and I said, oh, my name's Lesego. And they were like, well, okay, hi, Lily. And I was just like, oh, that's not my name. I don't even, how did we get there? So I think for me, that was the first time I was like, oh no, this is not going to work for me. And literally that thought came into my mind even when I was 3. I used to hate that name, but I also felt very powerless to say anything. I was just like, okay, if you're going to make friends, you have to be able to speak in a way that they understand. So, or have a name that they will be able to pronounce so that you can be friends with them. But I was very, very young. The first time I was like, okay, I think this is not going to be very nice to be here. But the loud racism, the macro racism, the first incident, I was in grade 6, and I had 2 white best friends, and we were just playing around, whatever, and they picked up someone's hat that was just lying around. And one of them goes, oh, ew, this smells like the K word. And I was just like, because I knew it was a very, very bad word, and I knew why it was a bad word. But I'd never heard it, like not even, because obviously, you know, the N-word has become colloquial in America, but we don't use that word here colloquially. It's not a slang term. It's just not a thing that people say. So I heard them say this, and this is girls who my mom, like I'd been to their houses so many times, their moms knew my mom. Of course, they also came with a lot of sort of patronizing questions that like, because my mom was even, I was asking her today, how was it dealing with as a parent, you know, hanging out with these ladies or whatever. She was like, I actually didn't really hang out with them because they'd always ask such invasive questions like, oh, what do you and your husband do? Or how come you can afford to be here? Like, how come? So she was just like, oh, she very much dropped me off and was like, girl, I'll pick you up when you're ready to go. But yeah, so they had said that word, and me and my group of friends, I think we were like 6 or 7 of us black kids in the grade, and we decided we were going to kind of do like mob justice, if you will. So we approached them and we were like, you know, oh, first of all, this Jola person, just Google satire and coconut curls, because you're really talking and you're being irritating. Please, like, if you weren't at the beginning of the fucking live and you don't know why I'm doing coconut curls, then stop talking. Anyway, yeah. Because it's just like annoying. You keep making all these comments as if coconut curls is a real person, and we did the whole, you know, context of what I do and why I do it. So let's just educate ourselves on the novel. Anyway, so I don't even know where I was now. Oh, okay. So this whole thing happened, and then we started talking to them, and then they start crying, and they go to the principal's office, and then they literally came back, and the principal punished us for making these girls cry, and now we were told to, you know, go home. And I was just like, how is it that these girls have done something so violent? To me, the K word is more violent than even physical, you know, interaction. I would rather, I think, even be hit. And yet we are the ones being punished because, like I said in my other video, white tears are very fragile. The minute a white girl or a white woman cries, the whole world is now, oh my God, this aggressive black girl, these angry black children. So that was the first time I also realized that these teachers don't have our backs. Like, here we are alone. We're going to be alone, and we have no one to tell, because I don't want to tell my mom and make her worried about us, because I understand the sacrifices that it took for me to be here, but I don't have the teachers to tell anymore, because they don't have our backs. They're always going to punish us for speaking out and make us feel worse than we do. So that's when I was like, okay, I have to learn how to defend myself, because it's literally the only way. But yeah.
You know, you said it's something, sure, that's, what a heavy story.
And even when people tell me all the time, like, oh, you're an angry black girl, why are you so mad? I'm like, I'm mad because every single day was a fight in these schools. Every single day we had to just try and survive, just try and be part of the gang, just try and assimilate a little bit, but then, you know, go home to visit family and then not worry about being called coconut and being attacked there. So there's like this weird world where you're like not part of anything, you're excluded from everything, and you want so desperately to be part of it all. Which is even why I chose the name Coconut Curls, because I was like, I'm actually going to turn it around and make it kind of a weapon back, because this is something that was used to exclude me for the longest time.
That's so profound, and thank you for that backstory. In fact, I know my husband was saying, because we always speak about this, obviously he's from, he's known as Ghetto King, so he's from the ghetto. He has a song called Ghetto. And me growing up in the burbs, he always says, I didn't realize how hard you guys had it, because we were always like, damn, you know, bonage, you know, variety. But he was talking about from a psychological perspective. So maybe, and we were actually touching on privilege, because, you know, you were seen as a black kid who were privileged. And I remember even Twitter saying that, you know, you guys are privileged. And privilege, because...
I mean, to a certain degree, I agree, because obviously there's the economic, but if you're going to also go, there's white privilege, there's straight privilege.
No, but Lesego, listen. One generation of privilege and 400 years of privilege is not privilege. As in, if your dad, both our fathers are doctors, if your dad messed up and got fired from his job when you were still a kid, and my dad did as well, or mom, or whatever the case is, you going back to wherever you're from, whether it's in Makai or Lokshin or whatever the case is. But we've been, remember, the system has told us, because you only deserve that much, that's privilege. So we see that as wealth. When there's like 60-52.
One mistake and you're back.
One mistake. And we used to see that. I don't know if you saw that at school. I remember quite a close friend of mine. She had to change schools, and it was so traumatic for all of us. And she was in tears because whatever, business wasn't doing well for her parents. And she had to go back. Do you get what I'm saying? So, and when I say go back, where she's like, she has to go back to Elokshini, And that's how fragile it is. And it hasn't changed, because if you mess up as well, Lesego, and I mess up as well, well, they